Great. I think we are live and ready to get started. Tom, you there?
I hope so.
Okay, I can hear you.
Can you hear
Wonderful.
me now?
Yeah, thank you. So we're about to kick off. I am Bethany Hale. I'm the head of marketing at Cedar, and I'm very excited about our content today. And this is our first ever Cedar Talks that we broadcast live via webinar. So it's a pretty special day. We all know the reason why. So we'll get started in just a minute. So Cedar is actually a patient payment and engagement platform. We were founded in 2016. We're a startup based in New York City. We've got about 100 people now. And we started this series called Cedar Talks to really focus on thought leadership and connecting not only the Cedar team, but the broader community with tech entrepreneurs who are really dedicated to solving hard problems with great design, thoughtful engineering, and, of course, industry expertise. So in the past, we've had Cedar Talks typically in person, but we've had Oscar's CEO, Mario Schlosser, tech investor, Ashton Kutcher, and most recently, A16Z general partner, Julie Yu, who also was a co-founder of Kairos. So a really great set of entrepreneurs and investors and just people focused on the tech and the health space. Every speech or every conversation has gotten better and better, and today is no exception.
I don't know. Let's keep low expectations.
Big build up, Tom. That's a big build up.
Okay.
So super excited to welcome Tom Lee, who is CEO and founder of Galileo, and we'll talk a lot about that. Tom's a Harvard-trained internist, and prior to Galileo, you founded One Medical, which we all know and love very well here at Cedar. You just have innovated so many times across the healthcare space. You are a leader in tech-enabled primary care, and you created the breakthrough medical reference app Hippocrates as well. So, super excited to be here with you today. And, I made this sign just for you. So
we're going, crafty.
Yeah, going crafty.
Yeah.
I'm one of those fortunate single parents at home with a 5-year-old during this whole situation. So I make no promises. This could very well be interrupted at some point. She might have clothes on, she might not. Anything could happen here. But anyway, welcome, Tom, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I'm honored to be the first virtual.
Yeah. First.
Weird days.
We'll see if you're the last. We'll see if you're the last, and we will definitely have you in person sometime soon. So
that's great.
Looking forward to that. So we'll kick right off. I think we're going to focus the first part of this conversation on your, just general career and your focus on the healthcare space and being a tech entrepreneur. And then, of course, we'll talk a little bit about COVID-19 and the pandemic we're all experiencing at this moment, and sort of your reaction to that, and where you think the future of healthcare goes. In light of what we're all experiencing today. We did get a lot of write-in questions, so I've tried to incorporate those where I can, and we're also very open to people typing in the chat function of this recording. So, maybe we can answer a few on the fly as well. We'll see how this goes.
Cool.
So just to get started, there's a lot of interest from the audience in learning a little bit about how your early interest helped your career path and perhaps even your success as an entrepreneur. You started practicing medicine, but then transitioned into entrepreneurship. So can you talk a little bit about that journey and sort of what brought you there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've mentioned in some other prior contexts, but, I really wasn't a business person or an entrepreneur. I was, a physician at the end of the day that wanted to practice medicine. But I kind of ended up being a entrepreneur out of necessity, because everybody asked about the healthcare system and nobody could answer the question. And the typical question I asked when I was in my medical training was, why are we doing it this way? This makes no sense. And when you looked at it from a patient lens, a physician lens, or a healthcare provider lens, or a purchaser's lens, it seemed like, the system was doing a lot of irrational things. And it seemed really hard and viscous to change the system. So I'm like, there's enough capital in healthcare to be reconfigured towards better patient care. So Why don't I figure out the trade craft of business? And so that's kind of what I spent my time doing in business school, and then through startups, really just on the fly learning. Yeah.
But you were involved in startups prior to business school, is that right?
No, I mean, delivering pizzas and working in, labs. So
Sure.
not super entrepreneurial. Yeah, I was pretty much just a newbie. I had, instincts about things. And once I figured out what business and entrepreneurship were, I think I was doing activities that would bode well for being an entrepreneur, which is, leading, operating, solving kind of problems, like learning how to solve problems, right? And so I think I probably was doing that naturally, just didn't have a label. But once I, went into business school and then started meeting other kind of like-minded people, then I realized, oh, yeah, this is what it means to create a business. To me, like the concept of a business or any type of entrepreneurship was such an abstract concept. I was so used to dealing with organs and bodies and people, right? And then you had this concept of business, and didn't make any sense to me when I first started. But then I figured it out, and then it's like, it's just life. Yeah.
Fair. I had a
Yeah.
similar experience in business school.
Yeah.
Yeah, so talk about Hippocrates if you would. And it's a medical reference app that's still really widely used in the medical community. So, you hit a successful product market fit right away.
Yeah.
So why do you think that was? Like, why has that technology and that value stood the test of time?
It is kind of crazy if you think about how long ago that was. And, I date myself on the original platform that we designed. It was, Palm Pilot. So it's a little bit baffling to me that it, is still it's a great thing. I love the fact that, docs still love using Hippocrates and find it valuable. Back in the day with Hippocrates, it was kind of an accident, right? It's a student project that we all wanted to cut our teeth on a startup, and it was a student project that became a startup. At that time, it was mostly just cutting my teeth. One Medical was always kind of the next vision, right? But I knew I needed to just get some basic business experience. So some friends and I from business school started working on this, and I think it just, we didn't actually have any clear lanes there, but I think it became quite clear that I was a natural product guy and kind of a clinical, content guy and operator guy. So I ended up kind of focusing my energy on that. And I would say back then, it's a very similar principle design that we did at One Medical and now at Galileo, which is, if you focus on user experience and solving a fundamental problem, patients will find it an enjoyable experience, and you will get, high net promoter scores and virality. So we were lucky that that intensity in those early days at Hippocrates, we were able to validate that product market fit pretty much out of the get-go. And maybe it's good instincts, whatever, but we were able to figure out quite quickly. It was literally over a summer that we built the thing, and it became kind of a viral hit among doctors where, it's a pretty clunky process. You got to buy a Palm Pilot, plug it into your computer, sync it through the internet. It was very clunky. Now it's much more sophisticated, which is kind of part of the catalyst for Galileo, which is the tech stack is so much more sophisticated on the mobile device now that you can do almost anything. But back then it was pretty constrained. So, but we kind of just forged that product market fit, and then you continue to iterate off of that and make it better and better. And fortunately, we had a great team, both on the content side and on the software side, that make that thing, continue to hum today, despite people's best efforts to the contrary.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's so interesting. And it definitely, sounds like you started with obviously the value because you had that clinical experience and you knew what was missing in the market, and use that experience to get you there. And then you founded One Medical in 2007. What was the ultimate vision for One Medical when you started, and the problem that you wanted to solve? And then I guess the follow-up to that is, do you feel like you accomplished that vision, or did a new path emerge along the way?
Yeah, just to kind of address that prior comment about the clinical background, I do think that probably is a unique lens to the companies that I've been involved in. And it comes out of the true spirit of why people go into medicine, right? Which is to care for patients and solve those problems. And so that lens of clinical experience and how that translates into patient care and the patient-clinician relationship is really a critical aspect that has driven Hippocrates, and then ultimately was kind of the main reason why I went to business school, was to start up a One Medical. And that was the same motivation. The only difference was, instead of saying, hey, let's arm clinicians with better tools to take care of patients, now let's design the patient experience. And it was a much bigger kind of leap of faith to solve that problem. And so the original vision was similar to what One Medical is today. So that's, lucky that it's rare that you kind of have this sketch and it kind of comes to fruition. But I think the vision was so obvious and clear, right? I mean, and the catalyst was, you have these high touch experiences in industries outside of healthcare, Starbucks in the coffee analog, these kind of nice restaurants, these nice boutique hotels, and then healthcare, where you would imagine the humanity and the high touch experience was as critical, was the exact opposite. And so it was a lot of learning. I was like, why are 99% of physician practices all the same and broken? Why do 70% of them have the plexiglass? Why do all of them have the dingy waiting rooms and the highlights magazines? There's a reason. And then you have to say, well, how do you break away from the norm? And what's counterintuitive about One Medical is it was really the economics of how you make primary care work that mattered. And so if you looked at traditional primary care when we were starting off One Medical, nobody was interested in primary care. This is pre-Affordable Care Act. And nobody thought you could make anything work in primary care that had any economic viability, let alone attract venture capital. So it was a pretty big leap of faith back then. But I knew that there was so much money in the healthcare system that was being wasted. I knew that the patient experience was pretty crappy. And I knew that primary care had a lot of great touch points with patients, that if you could design the better mousetrap that was not only higher touch, but more efficient, then you had a better model that would work.
Mm-hmm. Did you know how to do that from the beginning? Like, what was the design for One Medical so clear to you? Like, this is how you make things not only more efficient, but a better experience for patients. Was that a direct line?
Yeah, I wish it were as clear. I mean, the vision was super clear, but how you get there there's a huge gap, a big vacuum. And literally after finishing Hippocrates, I was ready to start One Medical, and I was like, maybe I should do consulting practice, helping other practices first before I start my own innovative practice. And but it was taking too long. I'd already been through residency and business school and then Hippocrates. So I'm like, I just got to do it. And I remember one of our professors at Stanford, Irv Grossbeck, saying, the only way you do a startup is you just got to do the startup. You just got to jump in. So at that point, I just jumped in and I said, I'm just going to figure it out. And it's a good thing I did it, because it did take a long time to figure out all the different things about why healthcare is broken, all the different things that you need to rewire differently, all the management that you need to build to actually successfully execute it and then scale it. So, One Medical is a long path towards where it is today, and it continues to learn and grow. But, the amount of you just can't replace. It would just, every year, we're just doubling, how much we learned new and then how to execute a better service model.
Got it. And my understanding is that you mentioned it's before Affordable Care Act, people weren't investing in this space. And my understanding is you didn't have outside investment when you first started One Medical. Is that right?
Yeah, it was pragmatic. Nobody would have funded me, even though I had a bit of a track record with Hippocrates. At that time, funding a brick and mortar business in healthcare, where most VCs weren't, and attract venture capital with a return equation that most services in retail businesses don't attract. You don't see a lot of retail businesses being funded by venture capital, let alone healthcare, primary care businesses. So it was pretty much a non-starter. So I knew I needed to validate at least the concept and the unit economic myself, very similar to what we see today in seed-funded tech companies, but just validate product market fit and or unit economics.
Mm-hmm.
And the good thing is, with a relatively small amount of capital, we were able to do that. And once we validated product market fit and unit economics, then we were able to attract professional capital. But it still wasn't easy. And plus, we knew this would take longer than a traditional tech company. So you wanted an early stage VC that would be long, right? And we lucked out, obviously, with Benchmark, but they made a big bet on us, and we're forever grateful.
Got it. And you've mentioned that the things that One Medical do well, really improving the patient experience, starting with even the aesthetics of the office and, the overall end-to-end experience, and giving physicians more time with patients, things like that. I heard you say One Medical was doing 10 times the service at about a third the traditional labor costs. So curious as to how you designed that model and how you made that work and lower, costs, but, improved quality, and not only for the patient, but it sounds like the physicians as well, if they're able to spend more time focus on care.
Yep. Yeah, that's just one of the many fallacies in healthcare that we just debunked, right? That you can have more for less, right? Basically. And anybody you talk to said, oh, there's no way you can make primary care work. There's no margins. You need, all these people to do all this administrative work, all this paperwork, all this insurance work, all the insurance companies are slow. And a lot of that was rhetoric. I mean, when we kind of got down to the nut of it, a lot of that wasn't necessarily true. And at the end of the day, it was about basic management. So when we look at the results that One Medical is able to achieve, and it is literally 10x a service at about a third the labor costs, there's two factors going on here. One is the benchmark's pretty mediocre, right? The average medical practice, particularly in primary care, is not effectively run. And it's because doctors are not really good at management. We're scientists. We're trained as humanists. We're not trained as operators. And so most clinicians, particularly primary care clinicians, aren't that great at management. And then hospitals that tend to acquire these practices are not great at managing lean practices. They're used to dealing with, industrialized hospital-based procedures. And so they tend to not make really smart or lightweight decisions in practices. So they tend to lose money in traditional environments. So the benchmark is pretty bad, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is hard to do, but it's not the hardest thing to do. I mean, it's complicated. And then the second thing that we did was we were just much more disciplined. We didn't have all this legacy stuff, and we started very lean from the beginning and only added when we needed to. Mm-hmm. And I think the third ingredient, separate from kind of how we did it, is I think people underestimate, we've heard this in tech before about the power of an A coder versus a B coder versus a C coder in terms of performance. The same is true in hospitality and service. And so I think there's relatively little attention paid to the quality of labor and how well you manage a team. And you can see through the One Medical team how fantastic that team is. And you don't get that for free. Like, you have to spend a lot of time recruiting, training, and managing, and building a culture that fosters that type of activity.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the things that, I think keeps resonating with what you're saying is that you do focus on the patient experience and put that first, and obviously physician experience as well in your case. Cedar, it's one of the things that Cedar's focused on as well, and putting the patient first, thinking about how the patient would interact with their medical bill and what they're trying to do, because at the end of the day, the incentives then become aligned. People want to understand their medical bill so they can pay it. Providers want to get paid for a service that they've performed. So the incentives are aligned. Do you feel that same sort of alignment of incentives exists in what you're doing?
Yes and no. I mean, I think the patient focus as the North Star, I think, is a great place to start. when you think about that, it's quality and affordability at the end of the day, and you can include service as a subset of quality. But when you think about affordability, that's the key factor for most patients in healthcare these days, and when you look at the healthcare system. So with One Medical, we are navigating this Byzantine system of payment. So if you're patient-centered, you have to basically align the payment so that you can do what you need to do to make the economics work, but align with the patient. So one thing that we did, which was counterintuitive, because you've heard this rhetoric of, oh, you really can't take care of patients in a value-oriented way if you're paid fee for service. And we just find that hasn't been true. Your mission, your culture, your leadership determine how you care for patients, and it's always been value oriented. Remember, we were doing a lot of the virtual visits before it was paid for and before the Affordable Care Act. So we did it because it was the right thing to do, and we knew in the long run this would result in higher quality, lower costs. So we're doing all these virtualized visits as part of our model, and the way we funded it was by lowering our overhead. So by lowering our overhead, we could do more for less, and we took some of that savings and reapplied it to things that were better for the patient, more affordable for the patient, and allowed us to drive on this value-oriented thread. Before, let's be honest, even today, 10 years post Affordable Care Act, there's only a limited number of providers that are truly on a fully value-based platform, and particularly in the outpatient world, in a commercial world, it's still few and far between. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, what's interesting about One Medical in particular, it's like you've really established a cult following. Like anytime I'm in a room and someone mentions One Medical, or, they had a doctor's appointment, or, a video session, people just rave, right? So what are the few things that you think have really made the biggest impact with patients, based on the feedback that you've received? It's clear you're receiving a lot of feedback and reacting to that, and providing an environment that people just really love.
Yep. It's pretty basic. So, there's so much today that you can see and you can read and look at One Medical, and it might look like this whole big thing, but it still goes back to, our first years building the first practice. I would say, number one, it's getting access, right? I mean, the key thing is being able to see a provider when you need to, at the right time, in a convenient way. That's a part of the equation. And then it's the provider, right? Who is actually the team, and when I say provider, it's like the broad care team, but whoever is interacting with the patient, it's the mindset and what I call the patient orientation, the empathetic mindset of our team, and it's how we hire and train and manage that team. And those are the two key aspects. And then the third, which is an intangible, is reliability. Meaning, in most medical practices, you might get one or two of those some of the time, or maybe, infrequently. With One Medical, you get that type of reliability most of the time, not all the time, right? And those are things that we constantly work at One Medical. There's always something to work on that continues to improve, our defect rate and all the kind of gaps of variation that we try to close. But what's unique about One Medical, in the fact that we've scaled it nationally, built it organically, is on the whole, I know if I refer somebody, or if somebody, go see One Medical, on the whole, on average, it's a great experience, and it's a reliable experience, meaning they're going to have follow through that happens reliably for the most part. It's not 100%. The aspiration is 100%, but we focus our attention on defect rates and how do you reduce that over time, just like any other well-managed business. Yeah.
Right. No, that makes a ton of sense. Well, thank you for that. So I know you mentioned scaling One Medical. So you grew to more than 80 clinics, is my understanding, across the US. What do you think health systems can learn from One Medical, and how do you take a big, organization and pull out those really patient-focused, those nuances that you've mastered on the One Medical side?
Yeah, no, I think systems have a tough job. They have many more moving gears, a lot more capital, a lot more regs. So in general, hospital systems and healthcare systems have a 10x, 100x much more complicated job. That is part of the nature of the problem, is they're almost too big and too complicated to move dramatically, right? And so you're seeing a lot of that in today's crisis environment. Now, that being said, technology and some of these other things are facilitating almost out of necessity this change. But for the most part, I would say, you know, the lessons learned from One Medical, I think, are A, it's possible, right? I mean, most systems don't think that a high-touch primary care is possible, but it is. The second, and you know, again, this is kind of just why we partner with systems, is it's hard. So it's hard to be great at something unless you really try hard. I mean, you can't just try. And the way most systems think about trying is putting a lot of money at it. And people equate money as a surrogate for effort. And that's usually where things go wrong. So it is a very intense pressure innovation, not a volume of dollar innovation. What we're seeing today in the COVID crisis is a dollar innovation. Dollars being thrown at problems with more resources and just stuff happening. And you know, I know we'll maybe talk about COVID a little bit later, but I just think that there's a little bit of a hype cycle right now on, oh, it's the future, you know, we're never going back, and it helps the video vendors to say that, but at the end of the day, you know, these need to be built on durably sustainable economic and operational models, and so those things will need to change more durably for this thing to stick. But you know, the good thing is you got patients and providers exposed to it more. There's more receptivity to it, but we'll see kind of how much sticks, because there is a reality that systems have a really tough job. They take care of everybody, high capital, high regs, low margin, and you know, they're getting hit pretty hard right now. So we'll see, you know, what the aftermath is and what really draws their attention. But we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We will talk about this more for sure.
Yeah.
I'd also love to switch gears just for a second to a few minutes to Galileo, and would love, I know it's more recent for you that you founded Galileo and it's a new model, but can you talk about the model at the most fundamental level? Like, what is it? What are you trying to do? And a bit of a compare and contrast with One Medical and the patients that you focus on there versus Galileo.
Yep. Yeah, with most of my entrepreneurial career, remember, I didn't want to go, oh, I want to start up a company and then I'm just going to call it quits. My original motivation was solving patient care systematically for everybody. And so One Medical, for the most part, is an urban commercial model. And I felt like there was another opportunity in another entity, which I started a couple years ago, called Galileo, to address everybody else, right? And so, you know, for me, my long-term mission is still to continue to transform healthcare on a quality and affordability basis for almost everybody. And so to me, there's an opportunity to look at areas where One Medical isn't, particularly, let's call it rural and non-dense geos. And then you also look at Medicare and Medicaid, some of the more complex and underserved populations where One Medical really wasn't designed for that. One Medical was designed mostly for an office-based construct, mostly in a commercial setting. And so we wanted to design something that was much more designed around complex patients, underserved populations, and people that have a lot more needs that just don't fit necessarily an office visit. So the way to think about Galileo is kind of bookends, you know, upstream digitally and downstream in the home around care for more complex and varied populations.
Okay, got it, got it. Do you think, or I guess, were there key things that you learned through your entrepreneurial experience with Hippocrates and One Medical that you're now, you know, quickly implementing with Galileo, just from a leadership perspective, culture perspective, fill in the blank, but as you build a new organization, what do you think are the priorities?
Yeah. It's a great question, and it is kind of fun. I've done some side businesses in parallel of these big three, but I definitely think of it as Hippocrates, One Medical, and now Galileo as the big step sequence. And it is fun because I'm taking a lot of my learnings from Hippocrates and One Medical and applying it into Galileo. So you can see elements of both those organizations in Galileo, which is great. And so there's a compounding and leverage on just skills, assets, expertise that we can apply much more quickly in Galileo. So that's kind of a nice thing from what I call an expertise lens. From an operational lens and just a pragmatic lens, it doesn't compare. The tech stack, the startup opportunities outside of maybe the COVID crisis right now, but really the ecosystem for creating a startup these days is so nice. It's an order of magnitude better than when I first started One Medical, and an order of magnitude from Hippocrates. So the ability to start up a high performance company and tech stack today is just not even comparison. So it's pretty fantastic on that side. The third ingredient, which is culture, is really fascinating when I look back at the three companies, because when you think about culture, they're ultimately key ingredients of the early team, predominantly influenced by the founder or founders and or the CEO. And so I always kind of look at it as like a soup or a stew of some sort. And so the weird thing about it is each of those three cultures are different, even though I'm a common ingredient. The weird thing about it, and I hate to say this, but I'm like this piece of wood that's gotten a little bit older and more stale. And so, this key ingredient that's me is more mature. I'm still a little bit temperamental, but I'm less temperamental than I used to be. Yeah. And so it creates an ethos in the company that I can't control because it's who I am. And so what's weird about when I look at the three different cultures is they each have a different part of me in my age and life cycle, right? And my personality. And also the early leaders that are around the team and that stage. So it's kind of fun. I mean, it's just, I love thinking about culture and personalities and how they fit to make a great company. And we've designed Galileo to be different. Like it has a very different purpose than even One Medical, which, if you look, they might look similar, but they're pretty different at its kind of root. And so the cultures are fairly different. So, and then I'm also older, so, take those into account.
Yeah, I still like seasoned. I'm going with seasoned.
Yeah, I'll go with seasoned over stale. That's a great, I'm going to co-opt that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so that's interesting. How many people are employed by Galileo right now? Like how big's your team?
We're pretty lean and mean. If you think about it, we're attacking two fronts. So really two business areas with two different types of services. And we're about 70 or 80 folks right now.
Okay, great. So Cedar's, I think I mentioned in the beginning, we're at 105, I think.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Right now. So, and when I started in January of 2019, I was employee number 46. So we've been growing quickly from an employee perspective, but even more so momentum from client signings in first quarter and things like that. Do you have any advice about how to manage this, high growth time period as an organization? And, now we're facing a global health crisis that's, blown the rule book away, basically. But yeah, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, sure. The way I think about org design and org size and what's the right way to manage a team has to do with obviously the scale, but also the velocity. Mm-hmm. And then the velocity is a function of the environment, right? So if you think about it, how big is the opportunity? How quickly are you guys moving? Do you want to be more cautious or not? And then therefore that sets a pace of growth. And then based on that, it's just, I always feel like org and org design is like an organism. So you want to think about the organism dynamically as you start to think about, the thesis of how you want to scale that. So meaning if you're going to scale quickly, you put more structure in earlier, right? And when you start doing that, it changes what I call the gear, right? You're moving the organization to a different gear. And in general, my bias is change gears when you really need to change gears. It's hard to go downshift. And so, I think it's kind of like organisms like forward momentum. It's never fun, and it feels overly regressive to slow down or regress. So it's helpful to have a healthy growth ecosystem and less of a choppy ecosystem. So depending on the pace of growth and what you see going ahead, it's okay to defer that gear shift. But when you do that gear shift, it does change the nature of the culture and how people work with each other. And so, I'm sure you guys are thinking about it, but when you think about your headcount plan and where your people strategy is, that will then determine if you need to make a gear shift on org design. Because that's ultimate org design is what changes things, in my opinion. And that is what creates the gear shift. And that gear shift actually creates a lot of opportunity for people, but it also creates a lot of sadness and kind of, existential re-examining for other folks. And so it always creates a little bit of tension in the org. So, just be deliberate about the gear shift is all I would say. and if you're going to be, throttling in second gear and waiting to move it into third gear, that's okay. But then just come up with other ways to keep that momentum going without changing the gear. Sometimes it's just changing the ingredients of the people or the fun, or changing the nature of the interactions, changing the nature of the challenges until you're ready for that next gear shift. But yeah.
Got it. No, that's helpful. It's been interesting because we've had people, I'm sure other organizations are dealing with this too, but people starting, new hires starting during a time when none of us are together in the office. It's interesting how we're kind of trying to maintain the culture through a video format, and joining a new organization during this time has got to be really difficult. But we're doing what we can. The Zoom happy hours are still in full effect.
It seems like you guys got a strong culture.
Yeah, we do. It's like, it's what we all focus on primarily. So I think it helps keep us successful and motivated and aligned with the vision and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And so speaking of COVID, how are One Medical and Galileo being impacted right now? Everyone's being impacted, but so many people and organizations are impacted very and vastly differently based on who they are in the market. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, we've got a great team leading One Medical at this stage with Amir and a lot of the new leaders and the established leaders that have been in the org. But I think they've been doing a fantastic job. I mean, we had a bit of a crisis way back when with the H1N1 when I was leading the org, but this is an order of magnitude much more complicated. And One Medical is much larger enterprise at this stage, but they've adapted pretty amazingly, meaning, we've moved to mostly virtualized visits, scheduled visits, respiratory clinics. We were one of the top testers in the country, facilitating COVID testing. And it's a testament to how quickly the team has adapted to operationalize these new objectives. And then even some drive-through testing in some key markets. So I've been pretty impressed by how the team is managing this. And then, the economics are somewhat flexible the way we're funded. So we've got a pretty agnostic payment model that can kind of weather this choppy storm right now. So I feel pretty good about the way One Medical is handling it. And a lot of systems are doing great jobs as well, just adapting. I mean, if you just look at the number of systems that have bolted on video visits and otherwise to kind of take care of their patients, it's, again, it goes back to healthcare providers. Healthcare providers care about patients. And if there's an obstacle, such as COVID or stay at home, providers will find a way. And so that's kind of just great to see, my fellow providers across the US just basically stepping up. And the same thing is happening within Galileo. I mean, we're a little bit easier in the sense that we're mostly digital. We have a home-based intense practice where we've adapted our operations to be safe for patients. And so we protocolized a much more virtualized home visit with patients that are much more complex and sick. But, again, it's very similar, but, much smaller scale, but the teams adapted to meet patients where they are given the constraints. And then, with Galileo, we launched a free program to most of the hard hit states pretty quickly, like within a week. We spun up a Medicaid program for Massachusetts and a bunch of the hotspot states in the West and some of the Northeast states as well. So, we're doing our part, but it's, it's just, we're just one of many that are working hard.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, that's interesting because I see so many different reactions, but I've been very impressed, frankly, with how different health systems and physician groups have pivoted so quickly and, figured things out, within a matter of days. You mentioned earlier, people are talking about this pandemic and how things, a lot of people are thinking this will change things forever, right? The technologies that are emerging right now and things like that. But what is your thought there? What changes in not only hospital, but even other provider groups like physician groups and ambulatory business models do you think will emerge from the COVID-19 crisis? Like, do you think there will be some lasting change that sticks after this? And what's more of the hype and what do we think is more reality?
It's just like anything in healthcare, people love the hype on whatever is hot and vogue and new and different. So that is just a general trend line. I do think we're in a moment of crisis. People are pretty anxious, stressed out, emotional, and I think you're just getting a lot of visceral reactions and conclusions and forecasts. There's nothing wrong with that. And we can all be hopeful. And, maybe that there is this new normal that happens afterwards. I've been through enough cycles in healthcare that I'm a little bit more sanguine. And part of the issue goes back to the economics of healthcare. And you can't magically change the economics of healthcare. Physicians, hospitals, the labor that work in healthcare, it's expensive. And the payment models and the way that people are reimbursed is a very established way that's predictable. If we were to suddenly transform the way we pay for providers with this new model, I think it's a little unclear. So I think it's going to be more gradual than people anticipate, separate from ultimately in the light of day when the dust settles. It's about the individual group, hospital, whatever your entity you're talking about, their individual economics. And probably more than ever, there's going to be a gravitation towards the economics that are driving most of the margins or value for any of these practice models. And today, as far as I can tell, it's still procedures. Yep. And so it's hard to see a lack of attention towards the status quo to revitalize the economics of these practices in hospitals. So I think back to basics is probably more likely to be the tenor over the next 12 months. But sure, I think there will be some incremental cracks that start to sow new seeds that will germinate over 2 to 5 years that see the use of digital health. The problem with digital health still, and people are saying, well, it's the cross-licensure issue that suddenly made this all easy. I'm like, kind of. But it's really about the economics and the operations and the situations that matter. And so even though providers are doing this today out of duress and necessity, I think, and they're finding it easier than they would have anticipated perhaps, I think this is a temporizing measure. There are a lot of docs who have very established habits that would prefer to put hands on body, to type a note in the office, to have their, support personnel measuring the blood pressure and the temperature. So we'll see how radical of a shift this is afterwards. But I think there's a bit of a pop, a more receptivity, but I think the actual fundamental change will still take a little bit longer than people are forecasting.
Yeah. I mean, I think in some cases this has forced patients to use these technologies for the first time because have another option. So if you're using this for a chronic condition, or for, to talk about something that's more close to, a normal situation, that's, you've got symptoms of something and you want to talk to someone about it. It's like, okay, you finally have this opportunity to use it that maybe you wouldn't have taken as a patient before. So the opportunities there, will it be the tipping point? We'll see.
Yeah, I think that's the TBD still. Look, I mean, it's in our best interest if it goes all digital. I mean, we're a fully digital practice. So, but I'm also somewhat realistic about it. And, it's kind of like, I don't know. We're all creatures of habit, and both on the patient side and the provider side. And so, depending on how long we're really in this mode, I think it'll take a while before habits fundamentally change, and the economic models that support those new habits are there. But it's an incremental tailwind to the digital health model. There's no question. And we're happy to be on the other side of that. But the analog, and I think I mentioned this, but Pre-Affordable Care Act, nobody was talking about primary care. Post-Affordable Care Act, everybody was suddenly the next new hot thing in primary care. And every hospital system was leading with a primary care led ACO, and all these new startups came up into primary care, and everybody was positioning themselves as, the medical home. And, 10 years after that, catalyzing energy, which was a much more fundamental catalyzing energy of the healthcare system. How many primary care innovators are there truly? How many value-based arrangements are there truly across the platform? These things take time to propagate, which is so frustrating in healthcare. And it's because there's so many layers in the healthcare ecosystem that need to change their habits. And so if it's just one, meaning the consumer just needs to change their habit, and instead of going to a brick and mortar facility, I'm just going to order something online, that's only one person needs to change their habit there. But in the purchasing cycle of healthcare, it goes from the purchaser to the health plan to the group to the provider to the patient, and all the other constituents in between. So that layered change does take time.
Right.
Not to be a drag. I'm sure people could be excited. If people are excited, I don't want to rain on your parade. It's good for us. So, but I think
No,
we'll
it
get
makes
through
sense. And it's not perfect yet. I mean, there's a couple questions that came in from the audience about analytic capabilities, and what's the next frontier in telehealth, and like where is that going? Do you think that there's capabilities that are lacking today that are on the cusp of emerging and moving things forward, so that it becomes even more easy to adopt and ubiquitous?
Well, I mean, that's a great lead into Galileo. I mean, if you think about what we're building at Galileo, it's not just another digital health, telehealth solution. Like, those are just commodity in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Any doc with Zoom can be a telehealth provider. So, with Galileo, what we're working on is the next order problem, which is how do you make clinical decisions more effectively, more quickly with data? And so it's a very different paradigm of care. So it's, again, early. We'll see how it gets expressed in different formats, but it's a very different model of care, which it's fun. I mean, it's counterintuitive. Like, when if we were to try out the service and product, I think you get a flavor for it. But where we're going with this is a very different place. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so another sort of COVID question, and just the market in general and the patient population, with Medicaid lives under management expected to grow because of the economic decline, what's your read on that opportunity? And, do you see people moving in to sort of provide support, or where is this going?
I might have missed this. You're saying with the Medicaid surge that's likely to happen? Yeah. There's a good and bad thing about it. The good thing is Medicaid is there, and it is a good safety net program for folks that, you know, fall off with their jobs or income or otherwise. The bad thing is it does have a churn cycle to it, which makes it hard for value-based models to work really well against that. And so there's an opportunity, but you kind of have to be able to handle some of the complexities of a high churn population. So, you know, what's nice about the business I'm working on now is I get to dig in deep on some of those issues, right? So now we've got a pretty good understanding of operations and service design and tech and data and provider workflow. So now I can work on the trickier problem of how do we operate in all 50 states to take care of the Medicaid population thoughtfully on a sustainable, affordable basis, given all the weird incentives and constraints that might be going on within well-intended Medicaid programs. And so, so that is some of the challenge when you look at particularly value-based arrangements in the Medicaid population.
Got it. Sorry, my daughter, that was.
No worries, yeah.
That was her cue. Someone's knocking, Mom.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. We've got a few minutes left. Wanted to ask about, you know, mental health. Again, this is a time of anxiety for people, financial strain for almost everyone. Do you think, and definitely on the practitioner side, so do you have any predictions on, you know, how mental health will be treated in the future? There's already been, you know, movement to talk and treat mental health, you know, more openly, but this is so intense for so many people, and the emotional distress and PTSD for all practitioners. Do you see that, you know, being impacted as well?
Yeah, let me answer that. And then if there's some time, I'd love to answer any participant questions if there are any. So if there's time,
yeah,
or maybe not.
Okay. If those popped in as well. Please.
Yeah, so I can answer anything if people want to throw out some questions in the Q&A, and I'll just power through them really quickly. It's the last power through, if that's all right.
Yeah, do it.
Yeah. But yeah, on provider well-being, I mean, this is, remember when I said, oh, you know, I was just a provider, I'm a scientist, humanist, like that is what the medical community is like. It is really committed people that want to care for patients. So even though we entered pre-crisis with a pretty broken healthcare system with pretty burnt out clinicians across the board in almost any sector, with this crisis, providers have stepped it up another gear. And it's administrators and providers and all the other care professionals in and around healthcare. They've stepped it up, and that's a testament to the team and you know, and the broader ecosystem. Every retired doctor, other virtual doctors, including myself, were ready to basically go into the ICU or ER if needed, and that's just the mindset in which we're trained. So, so there is a reserve energy there still that's motivated by patient care. That being said, you know, we do need to fix our systems to better support providers. And that gets back into the economics. You know, if you were to say, hey, you know, is there something that healthcare systems should learn? It is that every dollar wasted on overhead is the dollar taken away from patient care or provider sustainability. And so I do think that we have way too many high overhead systems, including hospitals and other provider groups, that every dollar of waste on the overhead side translates to, you know, less effective patient care and more provider burnout, because providers then need to see 20, 25, 30 patients a day, or they need to do double shifts or whatever. So hopefully we'll get there, but that's a long road to hoe. And obviously we're focusing on that with Galileo. You know, One Medical is a great model of practice. It's still very hard to practice in a One Medical model. The Galileo models, I think, hopefully better, but the goal is to make the practice model even more aligned. But in the absence of that, there's some, you know, wellness initiatives that are going on. But, you know, hopefully we'll get through this and figure out a way to have a dialogue about that. And I know there is actually a growing number of people that are interested in that, so that's great to hear.
Yeah, I'm seeing that as well across the board. Just like, I think everybody's in crisis mode still right now, but
yeah, totally.
We'll think about that. I'm not seeing questions come in through the chat, so.
Oh, you don't see the Q&A thing?
I don't. Are you seeing?
Oh, you want me to just power through?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. let me quickly answer them just so they feel heard.
Do it.
Ashley, do you have an opinion about providers using telehealth remotely from home, specifically regard to confidentiality, professionalism? It's not optimal. It should probably be better managed, but in a crisis situation, I think people are doing what they can. I do think if you are working from the home, you have to think pretty thoughtfully about what that environment is and how you still connect socially. I do think that a lot of providers are inherently social, so that is lost. Josh asks, how does One Medical partner with local health systems and emergency departments for their patients that need to seek episodic hospital? So in general, One Medical partners with most systems in most markets that we're in. And so we develop these kind of symbiotic handoff relationships that are a little bit more seamless. But it's an organic process, and it really just depends by market. I don't know if that helps answer the sheet. As healthcare becomes digital and cloud-based, how do providers maintain data privacy and security, especially as some cloud service share or mine data? Yeah, I mean, this is true of almost anything out there. How do you ensure that? Ultimately, this is government's job. They should probably do a better job at transparency, privacy, and security in general. And, you know, my personal feeling is I think we need some third-party way to validate this almost on a stress tested basis, so we can have a little bit more confidence in our vendors. Obviously Zoom has not engendered that, but I haven't been photobombed yet today. So some anonymous person, I'm not sure I'm going to answer an anonymous attendee, but for Medicaid, how are you thinking about patient acquisition? That's kind of very tactical, sorry. Entrepreneurs, strategists that lack a full medical background, resources, behavior, would you recommend? For the person that wants to understand full medical background, hang out with doctors, shadow doctors, really get to know physicians. As I've mentioned before in another prior interview, there are only so many entrepreneurs that I feel understand physicians. Jeff Taney, who runs Doximity now and was one of the co-founders at Hippocrates, he's like one of the classic examples. He basically, he is so focus on understanding what it's like to be a doc. I think Jonathan Bush is another one who really gets what it's like to be a doctor, really tries to understand the pain of physicians rather than dismissive of it. And I think those are generally great entrepreneurs. What are your thoughts on provider consolidation? Do you think COVID will accelerate the trends? Yeah, unfortunately, this is a great point. You know, mom and pop practices are already thin, and there is no, you know, there might be some rescue, but it's only going to further consolidate with hospitals. That being said, the tools for starting up your own practice these days are better than ever. And I think increasingly we will see a renaissance of independent solo practitioners in the future. I think there's going to be a backlash at some point, and with tools and creative payment methodology, my hope is that there'll be more independent practices. Let's see, Trent, is this okay if I just power through? We get. This is normally the section I like, just to understand that I'm making sure that the audience is getting their questions answered.
Yeah.
How does Galileo compete for clinical talent when there are several companies that provide? You got to build a better service model, and you got to think about what motivates docs and why somebody would want to practice for Galileo versus anywhere else. I mean, there's lots of different personalities. Okay. I don't want to go over.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Tom. Appreciate it. Appreciate you powering through the last questions. And thank you for being our inaugural, webinar Cedar Talks candidate. So appreciate that. And, stay safe in quarantine. And thank you for everything you do.
Great. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.